Now this module, we will be talking about another function which is the indirect function. Now this indirect function in Excel is used to create a reference specified by a text string. Now basically this function is used to create dynamic ranges. Now what is dynamic ranges? We will come with an example. The meaning of dynamic ranges is that you dynamically change your reference and the value would change. Now how that is happening, how that works, I'll show that with an example. It enables us to create a reference from cell values. So from the cell value, it will help me to create the reference. So if you can see the cell value here, we can use these references to get the value. How? I'll show that. It is mostly used. Where it is used? It is mostly used for building dynamic references for calculations and chart ranges. So wherever you want to have a dynamic calculations or dynamic chart ranges, there is where indirect function becomes handy. One caution basically is that the indirect function is a volatile function and can cause performance problem in large complex worksheet. So that is why most of the people do not use it in a regular manner. But however, it has a lot of potential of creating certain dynamic data. So let's see how it works so that if required, you can also use it in your work. So the indirect function basically takes two parameters. One is ref text and other one is the what kind of a reference you are doing, what kind of a reference style you are actually using. Now ref text is the reference to a cell that contains an address or name defined as an address. And A1 is a logical value that specifies the type of reference. Normally we use A1 style to refer to our rows and columns as far as the reference is concerned. We normally do not use the R1 C1 style. So this is the default and it is true. So even if you don't give any value, it takes the default style, which is the A1 style, where we use it in our formula. So let's see how it works. Now for example, if I go to this and say is equal to this, then what I get here is simple, the value of this, which is very simple. So you say here this and you say B15 and it shows you B15 here. But what if I say indirect and then pass E14 as the argument? So what it does is it takes the E14 and then it looks at E14 and it finds whether this is an address. Yes, this is an address of a cell because whenever we refer to any cell, we use this format, that is A1 style, that is the row, column name and the row number. It says, oh yes, it is a valid address defined as text, which is ref underscore text. And it says, where does this B15 points to? It points to this cell. So when I say indirect E14, it doesn't take the value of E14, rather it takes the address, jumps to the address pointed to by E14 and display the value at B15. So if I select here, it's scrubber, which is B15. Now if I change this to C15 for instance, so what it show me? It show me the value of C15, which is 7. If I make this D15, it will show me empty because D15 doesn't have anything. Now if I make this B something, so I'll say B and I make it like 17 or 18 star. So here you give the reference, you change the reference and here the value changes automatically. So this is called as dynamic range or dynamic value. It's just not a single reference. You can also give a C14 to C18, right? So in that case, since it's a range, you need to do a sum or something because it won't show you a single value. If you do that, it will show you the value in this row. So if I say indirect and I give this and say enter, it will show 7 because it is in this row. Actually, it should refer to all of them. but in Excel it will only show you one value. So it picks up the value in the same row as this, which is 7. Okay, but what we need to do, some, for example, you need to do a sum and say enter. So it says 112.51. So if I drag this, it's 112.51, $112.51. So I'm getting the sum. So if you look at the formula, it says sum indirect, and so if I change this to C14 to C17, so it says 61. So that's 61. So this way, dynamic, if I change the address, I would be changing the value here, because this sum has a reference which is not fixed now, it is dynamic and depends on this cell for its value. So indirect will pick up this cell's see what is the address here, and if you can change this cell value dynamically, then this value would also change dynamically. We can also give name to our cells. For example, I want to give this a name. So I'll select this, go to my formula, go to create from selection, and say top row is the name which I want to give to each of these ranges. So B14 to B18 will be called products, and C14 to C18 will be called rate. Okay, products and rate, and say okay. I go to the name manager, we'll see yes, product B14 to B18 and rate C14 to C18. Now let me close this. Now can I use this in my range and count the number of products? Yes. So I can say count A, then indirect, and then I can give this. So now if I say enter here, I'll get 5. Use the count of this. Similarly, if I say is equal to sum indirect, and now I give the rate. So it will go where the rate, because this is a name, by the name rate I have stored this address. So it'll say okay, this is the name. It go to the name manager, and then it finds out the reference of that range and do a sum of this and show it to us. So 112.51. So if you select this, similarly you can do an average and say enter. So it's 22.5. So if you select this, the average is 22.5. So this way you can work with indirect by using this reference of a cell range, and then you can jump to that and change it. The moment you change these values, automatically these would change accordingly. Okay, I hope you got that idea. Let me give you another example. Now, for example, I would say row number here. So I will just mention the row number, for example, 14 to 18, right? So I'll mention 14. The product is, I will say, is equal to indirect I can also concatenate. So I'll say B. So my product is in B column, but my row in different rows, I have different project in the same column. So I make B fixed ampersand and then this 14. That's my product, which is soap. Very good. Similarly, I say is equal to indirect. This one C in the rate is in the C column, ampersand 14. So that will show me 12.5. Now if I make this row 15, this is showing me scrubber. If I make this row 16, it is showing me paste. Now if I can make this more dynamic and more better by putting a scroll bar. So if I go to the developer, go to my insert, I insert a scroll bar here. Right click, go to the format control. in the cell link, I'll linked it to this cell. So when I change, this will change. I will say that the minimum value is 14 because that's the row I have, minimum, and the maximum is 18. And it increments by 1. That means when I move this record, it will move 1 by 1. So 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. It will not go beyond 18 and not go before 14. And say OK. Right, and I move my cursor outside. Now see what happens. You see? So it goes to 18. You click here, nothing will happen. 14, so 17, brush. Paste. So this way you can see the product. So if you look at this formula, this is how it works. Indirect, B, and ampersand 14. So this way you can just play around with your functions dynamically by changing it using a scroll bar or something like that. So if you don't find the scroll bar here in the developer tab, look for a developer tab from your Windows and then add it to your ribbon. So that's it about indirect function.